Revisions. I'm struggling to come up with a time outside of named events like the global financial crisis or even COVID when backward-looking downward revisions were so severe. We have a lot of data releases to comb through today, in addition to reporting on the rapidly changing and ever-degrading economic conditions as a result of the war in Iran. Now, the reason I want to combine a look back with what's happening right now is to anticipate the future talking points from this administration. There's no doubt that the Iran war is shaping up to be the nail in the coffin of Trump's economic agenda, but that means that it's also going to be used to cover for the serious damage that was already done during his first year of the second term. And we can't let him get away with spinning this narrative. So we're going to dig into the stunning revisions to GDP and briefly cover trouble spots in everything from jobs and inflation to mortgage rates and private credit stress. So in our top story, we'll explain key terms like backwardation, demand destruction, and fiscal dominance that help contextualize the current environment. And by the time we're through, you'll be fully equipped for that online argument with your MAGA relatives. I'm Max from UNFTR, here with the macro take exclusively for Midas Touch. All right, let's talk about what it's like to have an eloquent wartime president that can galvanize a population around victory and shared sacrifice.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Oh man, I am really struggling with my clips lately. Here, let's try this one.
Watch what happens to these deranged scumbags today. He also adds that these people have been killing people all over the world for 47 years, but now I am killing them.
There's my guy. Let's kill all these scumbags. You know, these are the kind of words that get etched into monuments. This administration has painted itself into a corner with this war, which I believe will go down in history as one of the worst self-inflicted wounds of any presidency because of how destructive this will be to the economy. And that doesn't even take the human toll that any war takes into consideration, which will be considerable the longer this goes on. Now, in our top story, we're going to tackle the ways in which the war will manifest in the economy. But I think this Bloomberg headline says it all about where we are now. This economy was already in serious decline before the war began. And this is a theme that we've been harping on over the past year. But now it's in black and white with each new data release. So let's start with the revisions to GDP because they're brutal. The government just cut fourth quarter growth in half from 1.4 to 0.7%, which tells you how weak the underlying economy was even before the war in Iran. Now remember, we've already walked through how 2025 GDP was being propped up by a once-in-a-generation surge in data center and AI infrastructure spending, and how, in a prior Midas video, we showed that without that boom, the growth story basically fell apart. Analysts like Jason Furman and others have pointed out that almost all of the first half growth from 2025 was from data centers and information processing. If you strip that out, you're left with an economy that was basically flatlining. The administration tried to hang the already anemic Q4 numbers, though, on the government shutdown. But this 50% downward revision makes it clear that the weakness runs much, much deeper. And that's after counting hundreds of billions of dollars that were still poured into data centers and the AI build-out. Now moving over to inflation, not a lot of good news there either.
Consumer spending, real personal spending, barely rose in January, up 0.1% as Americans cut back on goods and focused on essentials like healthcare. Core inflation increased 0.4% on the month, 3.1% from a year earlier. And this is the Fed's preferred gauge. This is the one that they need to get down to 2% per their own goals, but haven't been able to for many years.
So this is the worst combination because you have households pulling back, but prices are still sticky and persistently high. Again, all before the war in Iran, when relatively depressed energy prices were the last fig leaf that the administration could hide behind to claim that inflation was under control. So now, let's look at the country's P&L as a whole. The latest Treasury data show that in February alone, the deficit, what we overspent, was roughly equal to the entire monthly revenue. And from October through February, the government has already run a deficit of just over $1 trillion, basically in line with Biden's last year. So not only has this administration failed to make any progress on the structural deficit, these numbers are pumped up by a surge in tariff revenue, because customs duties are up about 300% year over year, which is now legally and politically at risk because the courts and the importers push back on it. So there's a real chance that even these already ugly deficit figures will be revised worse once tariff disputes are unwound. And this matters because we're already struggling to contain our borrowing costs, and there are a few new moving parts making it even harder. First off, Treasury has been aggressively shifting from longer-term debt into shorter-term instruments. They're trying to save a few basis points at the cost of a much bigger refinancing risk tomorrow, which is okay if you think rates are going to stay down. But short-term rates, which we'll come back to in the main story, are still in the mid 3% range. But the 10-year is bleeding out. 10-year yields are rising as investors demand a higher risk premium to hold U.S. debt in this environment. And that hits home because the 10-year is the anchor for key borrowing costs like mortgage rates. And as you can see here, mortgage rates had finally started to ease a bit as the housing market went into a deep freeze and sellers and builders began to budge on prices, if not outright fire sale some inventory. So now, as long-term yields tick higher on war and risk and inflation fears, mortgage rates are moving up again, threatening to choke off what little activity was starting to return to housing. Meanwhile, the backdrop in financial markets is a steady drumbeat of rising risk in private credit, which we've been tracking here for months. Strategists at UBS and Bank of America have warned that private credit defaults could climb more in 2026, and we were already kind of in panic mode. So this stress is showing up in higher default rates and borrowers deferring cash interest payments, and that's how we know. Plus, bankruptcies have revealed some pretty shaky lending practices. Now, in the last few months, we've seen high-profile cracks like the subprime auto lender Tricolor and the auto parts maker First Brands, who both went under. And BlackRock has now capped withdrawals from its flagship $26 billion private credit fund after a wave of redemption requests. So when the biggest asset managers are gating funds and top bank CEOs are talking about credit cockroaches, that's not normal. So now the Federal Reserve is grabbing a mitt finally and taking the field, which in theory should be reassuring, but in this self-inflicted environment, their toolkit doesn't work the way it used to. So instead of bringing a new playbook, they're just falling back on an old one: deregulation. Fed and other banking regulators are preparing to relax parts of the post-crisis capital framework, scaling back some of the tougher requirements on big banks' trading books and mortgage exposure in the name of boosting lending. And look, I could spend an hour on the risks of doing this into a tightening cycle, but the bottom line is simple. We are heading into a severely tight credit environment at the same time that we're thinning out the shock absorbers. So rates are getting away from policymakers, which means that borrowing is getting more expensive across the board. And there are visible cracks in the shadow banking system with private credit and specialty lenders and leveraged funds because rates in that universe were already sky high before the war. So when bankruptcies started to hit last summer, you might remember that we dug through the term sheet for one of BlackRock's investments that they took $100 million plus loss on. And it showed that Renovo, their home improvement investment, had multi-million dollar lines of credit at anywhere from like 5 to 9 points over SOFR, which means that their real interest rates were as high as 15%. And the one thing that can turn a fragile lending portfolio into a full-blown crisis is a severe sustained inflationary shock where these numbers get even higher. So a major war in the Strait of Hormuz and an energy-driven supply shock building is exactly what we're flirting with. And that sets us up for our top story. All right, so let's talk about the economic pickle that this administration has managed to manufacture, because it's not just bad luck or no one could have seen this coming. It's the collision of three big ideas: backwardation in the oil market, demand destruction across the real economy, and an era of fiscal dominance that makes our normal policy tools almost useless.
Remember college? Well, now, college is over, and here comes your student loan debt.
All right, so let's start with backwardation. This is when the price of oil today is higher than the price for future delivery. So traders are basically saying, look, we know things are tight right now, but we think that it'll get better a little later. It's the market's way of betting that today's pain is only temporary. So that's where we are today, which seems okay on the surface. Spot prices have jumped on the Iran war, but the futures curve is signaling that prices should ease in the months ahead. But I think the market is clinging to this idea that it's just another flare-up that will muddle through like we've done before. But with each passing day, this assumption becomes a fantasy. Because this disruption, they think it looks like Iraq in early 2000s or even Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but it doesn't. So I would expect this trend to dissipate in very short order. We have to keep an eye on it. Now, those other conflicts were terrible. But the supply disruptions, if we're just being even keel about this, were mostly regional, they were anticipated, and they were managed around the edges. Russian oil, for example, was rerouted, and it was discounted, but it still flowed into the global system through workarounds and shadow fleets. So in this case, the choke point is the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically important pieces of water on planet Earth. A gigantic share of not just global crude, but refined products and natural gas, petrochemical feedstocks, and fertilizer pass through this narrow channel. Cut it off or just partially disrupt this artery, you're not just talking about higher gasoline prices on the coasts. You're talking about input costs for manufacturing, shipping, plastics, and most critically, food. And we're heading into the front end of the global planting and harvest calendar in many, many regions, which means that fertilizer and fuel need to be moving right now, not 6 months from now. So the longer this drags on, you're talking about a supply shock that creates lower yields and higher prices. And it has a very, very long tail. So this is why backwardation is an important tell, something that we have to look at, because as long as the curve is backwardated, the market is saying, we still believe that this is going to get resolved. But if this war runs for a few more weeks at its current intensity, you can expect that curve to flip into something called contango, which is where we were, by the way, where future prices rise above the spot price, because the market will start to price in not just an acute crisis, but a structural shortage. And when that happens, you're no longer arguing about a headline spike in oil. You're staring down a multi-year inflationary problem wired directly into the cost structure of everything. Do you remember COVID? That's exactly what we're talking about, just it came about because of a different circumstance. And here's an infuriating contrast. When Russia prepared to invade Ukraine, we had a heads up on it. For better, for worse, we kind of knew it was coming. And the Biden administration, therefore, spent months lining up alternative supply, talking to allies, talking to foes like Venezuela, preparing SPR releases, and gaming out worst case scenarios with energy and security experts. Now, it wasn't perfect, but it was planning, it was coordination, it was a strategy for how to absorb shocks and protect consumers. Have a listen to this.
We knew that war was coming already in December before the war between Russia and Ukraine. And so we started preparing different scenarios, and I briefed the president at the time on, here's what we do. We're going to have an oil problem. We're going to have a natural gas problem in Europe. And we started looking at all the different tools that we had at our disposal.
That's Amos Hochstein, who was an advisor to the White House at the time. And as he described, they were working the phones the whole time. They were working pipelines and alliances long before the first Russian tank rolled across the border. This administration has done none of that. It picked a fight in the most sensitive energy choke point on the planet, as we said, with no discernible plan for energy security, no diplomatic runway, and no coordinated response with allies. People can't even believe that we did what we did. And that's not an accident. This is the Trump governing philosophy, to just go from crisis to crisis and then talk tough on Truth Social and TV and hope that the markets clean up the mess somehow. That's not going to happen. The Iranians are dug in and they have all the cards right now. And now he's jeopardized his favorite thing, the stock market. So that brings us to demand destruction. This is what happens when prices get so high for long enough that people just stop buying. Not because they suddenly became virtuous savers, but because they're broke and they're out of options. And we're already seeing the early signs of this. Like we covered, even before the war, consumer spending was flattening out. Inflation-adjusted spending in January barely rose while the core inflation jumped. And that is, again, the worst combination. People pulling back while prices keep rising. And remember, energy prices were acting as a partial relief valve at that point. So when higher gas and oil increase, it bleeds into trucking costs, airline tickets, delivery fees, fertilizer prices, and the price of everything sitting on the store shelf. And for households that are already squeezed by higher rents and insurance and foods and all of the service costs around medical delivery and things like that, this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Because people drive less, they travel less, they skip discretionary purchases, and they stretch every single dollar just to keep the lights on. Now, on the business side, demand destruction shows up in canceled projects and hiring freezes, shifts from full-time to part-time or gig work. Margins get squeezed by higher input costs and weaker demand. And that really impacts smaller firms, especially especially the ones that are financed by private credit that are already at these elevated interest rates, and they get hit first and hardest. So when these dominoes start falling in an environment of rising rates and an oil shock, lending standards tighten more and credit dries up from Main Street. Doesn't matter what the Fed does with capitalization requirements or deregulation, which is what they're focusing on right now. This is absolutely the wrong policy prescription. Now, historically, when demand destruction looms, policymakers have two levers. Central banks can cut interest rates to stimulate borrowing and stimulate spending, or governments can use fiscal policies like tax cuts, targeted aid, public investments, and so on. And this helps cushion households and businesses. But here's the catch. Those tools don't work the same when you're already trapped in what's called fiscal dominance. Now, fiscal dominance sounds like academic jargon, but the idea is really simple. In a normal world, as if we know what that is anymore, the central bank focuses on its dual mandate, inflation and employment, and the government sets its budget more or less independent of that. Now, in a world of fiscal dominance, the level of government debt and the cost of servicing it becomes so big that monetary policy ends up serving the Treasury's needs, not the other way around. And look at where we are right now. The deficit, just for the first 5 months of the fiscal year, October through February, is already blown past $1 trillion. And that's with the supposed near full employment that we had, which we've debunked before, and the full impact of this war. And it's with tariff revenue still artificially juicing these numbers. Now, at the same time, the administration's been playing games with the maturity structure of that debt. So the Treasury's been leaning harder on shorter term instruments and trying to save a few basis points while leaving us more exposed to this rate volatility that might come about because of this shock. You can see how this just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, this Treasury idea, which Scott Bessent criticized heavily when Janet Yellen did it, by the way, and now it's his entire playbook, it might look clever, like on a PowerPoint, but it means that we have to roll over enormous chunks of our debt more frequently at whatever rates the market demands. And what is the market demanding right now? Higher yields. See, investors are demanding compensation for political risk, inflation risk, and fiscal risk. And the bond market is looking at this administration's combination of unfunded tax cuts, tariff-driven trade tensions, and an unnecessary war and saying, you gotta pay up. So layer all of this under the stress in the shadow banking system with private credit funds and BDCs and non-bank lenders where rates have been sky high for years and defaults are beginning to pick up. So in response, the Fed is reaching for this familiar, dangerous playbook, loosening capital requirements to coax more lending into the real economy. And Trump is still screaming about bringing down rates. This is the quagmire of fiscal dominance. The Fed has limited policy tools in this type of environment. Like you can't just slash rates to rescue demand because that would turbocharge inflation in the middle of an oil and a food shock. Likewise, it can't hike aggressively without pushing debt servicing costs for the government even higher and detonating more landmines in private credit and housing. So it's stuck doing this awkward dance of half measures like tweaks to regulations and just praying that the bond market doesn't revolt. Now, this administration is going to try to sell you a story in the coming months. They'll say that GDP revisions were the result of that temporary shutdown, or that it's just statistical noise, or they'll tell you not even to believe their own numbers, that it's all fake news, even if they're the ones that are releasing the numbers. They'll say that the deficit spike was a wartime necessity, even though deficits were already running north of $1 trillion through February. And the tariff numbers that are in there are possibly not real. They'll praise their own toughness on energy, even as they preside over one of the most avoidable and damaging energy shocks in modern history. So your job and our job is to remember the sequencing of events. The economy was already slowing. The revisions were exposing how flimsy the growth story was. Consumer spending was already stalling, while core inflation remained stubborn. Private credit and housing were already cracking under the weight of higher rates. The deficit and debt trajectory were locking us into an era of fiscal dominance. The war didn't cause these problems. It turned them from challenges into a full-blown crisis. Now, in the days and weeks and months ahead, you're going to be bombarded with competing narratives and very selective statistics, not just from this administration, but also from the Israeli government, the Iranian governments, and from think tank experts, whose job it is to go on mainstream media and sell you this war. The safest move in wartime is to narrow your information diet. So look for outlets with people who have actually been on the ground. Read more than you watch. We're fully in the disinformation phase now. And the disinformationist in chief on our side happens to have the loudest microphone. What we can track together and what you can swear with your own lived experience is what's happening to the economy in real time. The prices that you pay, the jobs you see available, the credit that's available or not in your community. Now, I'll keep cutting through the noise as best as I can, along with everyone here at Midas, to give you a straightforward read on what's actually happening and why. So make sure to connect with me on YouTube or Blue Sky at UNFTR and sign up for my free weekly newsletter at UNFTR.com. We're ramping up the coverage and analysis as fast as we possibly can to stay ahead of this thing. And remember, resources for everything that we cover are in the notes below. For the Midas Touch Network, I'm Max.
This is Elder G. So now you see how the prejudiced white man, it's what he do every time. It's what he do. When he came here with the Native Americans and he didn't know how to farm and he didn't know what diseases and everything, so they was dying. So they begged the Native Americans to help them out, to teach them about medicine and what they should use and what they should plant. And as soon as they learned enough from the Native Americans and start growing tobacco and showed them what herb to use for medicine, and as soon as they found all that out, they set out to wipe them out. I'm going to give you an example, a biblical example, compared to what the president and his minions is doing right now. See, the prejudiced white people, I'm not talking about the good white people now. I'm talking about the evil one. There's some evil blacks. There's some evil Mexicans. There's some evil Native Americans. But the evil, we're talking about the people that came to North America when there was people already living here. And those people came in and saw this good land And these people helped them back to health and showed them how to plant and showed them the different herbs and everything for medicine. And as soon as they got up on their feet, they turned around and tried to wipe the Native Americans and the Mexicans out. That's what we're talking about here. See, when Joseph's father loved him, and he loved Benjamin because those two kids was the mother, Rachel, who he loved it, who he wanted to marry. But Laban tricked him and gave him Leah. So naturally, he loved it, Rachel, but he didn't love Leah, her sister. He got tricked. So he loved Benjamin and he loved it Joseph. So he made Joseph a coat of many colors. And the other 10 kids that wasn't by Rachel, they got jealous because Jacob loved it Joseph and Benjamin. So one day, his daddy sent him to take food to the brothers, and when they saw him coming, they start making fun of him and say, "Here come this dreamer." You know, because God is using Joseph. Because he know that the famine is coming, and Joseph is going to be the one that delivered them through the famine. So when they see Joseph, they so jealous, they first said they was going to kill him. But Reuben, the oldest brother, convinced them not to kill him, just to put him in a pit to die, right? Because he don't want to have the blood of his brother up on his head. But then he saw some merchants coming, going to Egypt, so they pulled him out the pit and said, "We can get a little bit of money for him." So they sold him into Egypt. So when they sold him into Egypt, Potiphar, he saw the talent and he saw the calling up on the boy. So Joseph liked him. And Potiphar liked it Joseph. So they got together and Joseph was Potiphar's right-hand man. But Joseph was a handsome man. So when Potiphar was gone, Potiphar's wife tried to sleep with Joseph. But Joseph is a just man and a godly man. And he told the wife, "I can't do this. Potiphar trusted me over his house. And I'm not going to sleep with his wife behind his back." So she tried to rape him and take advantage of him. And he ran off. But when he ran off, she grabbed him by the robe. So she kept his robe. So she knowing that Joseph was going to tell Potiphar what she did, she went and told a lie and said that Joseph tried to rape her. So they threw Joseph in prison. But God had a plan. He had already planted that seed that said Joseph was going to be the deliverer of his people. So what happened, the king had a dream. And he wanted the Magi to come and to imitate the dream. But when the Magi came, they asked, the king asked them to tell him the dream. But the condition was that You got to tell him what he dreamed without him telling you anything. So what happened is when they got there, the Magi is mumbling between himself, and they told the king, you know we can't tell you. Go ahead and tell us what the dream was, and then we'll interpret the dream. Nah. The king said, nah. Y'all claim y'all in contact with God, and y'all speaking to the God. No, you tell me what I dream, and then once you tell me what I dream, I want you to tell me the interpretation of the dream too. So they were he know we can't do that. And then that's when the man remembered the promise that he had made to Joseph while he was still in prison. How Joseph could interpret the dreams. And he told the king, don't kill him right now. Just wait. And I know a man that can interpret dreams. So they went and got Joseph, and they cleaned him up, and they took him before the king. And he asked the king asked him, I hear that you this dreamer, and that you can interpret dreams. Is that true? He said, see, Joseph didn't take no credit. He said, it ain't me that interpreted the dream. It's God. It's the one that tells me the dream. And then I'll tell you what the dream is. So I don't want to take no credit for this, because God is the one that's interpreting the dream. God is the one that called me and put the words in my heart and in my mind and in my soul. God the one did it. See, once you give God the credit that he deserves, then you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. See, Christ is the one that gonna take the reins, but he's gonna work through you. See, once you build up trust, once you build up honesty, once you build up integrity, people will help you. People will listen to you. People will follow you. If people find out that you're serious, and people find out that you just, and people find out that you got integrity, they'll help you, and they'll follow you, and they'll listen to you. So he told the king, yes, I can, through God's strength and power, I can interpret your dream. The dream said, first, I saw 7 fat cows. For 7 years, that meant prosperity. And then I saw 7 poor cows. And the 7 poor cows, they devoured the 7 fat cows. And then Joseph said, look, this is what God said. For 7 years, you're going to have plenty. And you're going to be blessed with abundance. But after that 7 years of plenty, he said, there is going to be 7 years of famine. And then the king, he searched around to try to find somebody to be in the second chariot. And he was listening to Joseph speak, even though Joseph was a slave that was sold by his brother into bondage. The king said, you the man. You the man. You gonna be in the second chariot. He said, other than me on the throne, there is none in Egypt greater than you. Other than the king sitting up on the throne, he done went from slavery to riding in the second chariot, that no one is greater than him other than the king that sits up on the throne. You done went from slavery, from bondage, to ride in the second chariot of the most powerful nation on the planet, just so God can save the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's what God will do for you when you love him and put him first. And then you love your neighbor the same way that you love yourself. If you do these things, God will put something in your hand. The first thing he's going to do, he's going to sanctify you. And then once you've been sanctified, I mean purified, you done went through the fire. Once he sanctified you, and then he said he's going to declare you holy. And then once you sanctify and you become holy, then God said, I got something for you. I got something that's going to lead you, that's going to guide you in the way that I would have you to go. He said, I got something for you. He said, now that you sanctified, now that you holy, he said, I got something. He said, look, now these are my commandments. These are my judgment. These are my statutes. Guess what, Elder G? I want you to do them. I'm not asking you to read them or talk about them. I want you. I didn't make you sanctified. I didn't declare you holy for nothing. I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you permission to use my statutes and my judgment and my commandments. And then he give you an example of what he's talking about so you can fully understand what God just told you and what God just put in your hands. God is the one that sanctifies you. God is the one that make you holy. And when you commit to God and you become sanctified and he make you holy, then, only then will God say, now, Elder G, now you can use my statutes. Now you can use my judgment. Now you can use my commandment. Every tree that bring forth not good fruit, it is hewn down and it's thrown into the fire. Now you can judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. A good tree cannot bring forth bad fruit. Neither can a bad tree bring forth good fruit. By their fruit you shall judge them. That's what happened when you get sanctified. That's what happens when you get holy. When you get sanctified, God's going to give you something. He's going to give you power. He's going to give you understanding. He's going to give you wisdom and knowledge of who he is and what you can use and when you can use it. God have never lost a battle. God have never surrendered. God, he repented in the Bible, but he repented so that his name would not be blasphemed. Why should his name be blasphemed? God and St. John, it said, in the beginning, it was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things that are made by Him. And without Him, there's nothing made that is made. In Him was life. He came to His own, but His own received Him not. But those that believed it upon Him and believed it in His name, to them He gave eternal life. That's what we're talking about. God is sick and tired of a wolf running around in sheep clothing. A wolf should have never been able to fool a child of God. It's just too many wolves in the pulpit. Too many wolves in the choir. Too many wolves on the usher board. Too many wolves in the deacon board and the mother board. Jesus is the one that is the Christ. Jesus is the one that came down through 42 generations just so you can get your name written in the book of life. Jesus is the way. Jesus is the truth. Jesus is the life. Jesus is the door. Anyone that tries to enter up any kind of other way is a thief and a robber. That's what we're supposed to stand for when we confess Christ. That Jesus is right. That Jesus' way is right. But you got all these wolves running around in sheep clothing, pretending like they so godly. But inside, they are nothing but ravenous wolves. Jesus said, you make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but within they are full of dead man bones and all that iniquity. Anybody that says that they know God, but they keep not God's commandments, they are a liar. And the truth is not even in them. Which one are you? Which road are you going down? Are you going to the left or are you going to the right? All I know is I'm just like Joshua when Moses died. God said, Joshua, I want you to be strong and I want you to be courageous. If you walk the way Moses walked and you talk the way Moses talked, he said, boy, I'm with you. I got you. Just be strong and courageous. And Joshua answered, I don't know about them, but as far as me and my house, we talking about the 12 tribes of Israel that God just made him the leader over when Moses died. I don't know about nobody else, but I'm going to tell you this. As far as me and my house, we going to serve the Lord. That's how I feel too. I want to be strong and I want to be courageous, even if it's meant my death on earth. I know I have eternal life in heaven. Do you want eternal life? Do you want to live in eternity in hell? Or do you want to live in eternity in heaven with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, where the streets is paved with gold? God's throne is right there in the midst of you. There's a clear, pure river running from underneath the thorn. There's trees that bears 12 fruits in this season. One tree is going to bear 12 different fruits. And it's going to bear those fruits in this season. And the leaves of the tree shall be for the healing of the world. I choose to follow Christ. Wherever he leads, I'll follow. If he go to the left, I go to the left. He go to the right, I go to the right. If he stop, I'll stop. Put your trust in the Lord and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. Thank you.